Hey guys, it's Nekomews, and today we're going to be going over the post-mortem of my Ludum Dare 40 game, which was the first Ludum Dare that I participated in, and I decided to go with the virus idea that I came up with, which was actually like the first one that I drew down. But here we go. So you can see how I'm just sort of crossing off some things. And then I go into the basic, just getting some characters in a wall. So I've got four things right now. I've got the player, I've got the walls, I've got the viruses, and I've got the blood cells. Those are the main things that are required for my game so that I could test it as quickly as possible. So I start working on movement here, and I actually go back and change this a few times actually. Right now it's just a set speed, but when I go back later I actually change it to a acceleration, which some people really don't like. So I think if I do a version 2.0, what I'll do is I'll reduce that a little bit so that it's not so unwieldy. I drew a little face on the viruses because I didn't yet have anything else for them. Want to distinguish them just a little bit more and have a bit of fun, you know? So here I'm actually setting up so that the viruses will go to the closest blood cell, and that works really well. They all go towards the closest blood cell. Problem is, they're all going to the same closest blood cell. So it's actually the closest blood cell to the group, not the closest blood cell to each individual, which takes me an incredibly long time to actually fix. You can see here I'm trying to fix it right now, but then I decide to move on to health bar instead because I just couldn't figure it out for the time being. And I'm basing the health bar just off of the map at the moment, but I will later on base it off of the view that I'm using, which means that I won't be able to zoom out anymore without the game failing. And here I'm just adding on different values like blood left, blood max, so then I can use those for the health bar later. And I start labeling different things, different values and such. I end up not really labeling everything later on, sort of lose sight of it a bit. With how many changes I'm making in the countdown. So I've only got 2 days, 4 hours at this point. 2 days, 4 hours, 40 minutes. And I'm back on the virus trying to get it to work right. It's still not the way I want it to, and it's actually failing a couple of times where it's not wanting to run. What ended up fixing this was I had to use self. I had to say self dot and then the value I wanted. So then the object was looking at itself rather than all of the objects of that type, if that makes sense. Here I'm actually making a bigger blood cell for use as a hub marker. And then I'm making the health bar go underneath it and making the numbers pop up as well. It's still not yet based off of the view because I'm still using a zoomed out view, as you can see. The health bar gave me a lot of trouble too. I couldn't quite get it to work for a while. Not even really sure why it wasn't working, but there you can see the start of it actually showing up, which is good. Then change to the view. I make it based off of the view, and I'm moving things around. There we go. Now it's working. Going rather fast here. Still working on the health bar. Trying to make it easier to call up the view, which I believe I ended up scrapping. And now you can see that the health bar is basically in its final form. There we go. Now I'm recording some sound effects. I believe this is the popping sound effect that plays. I decided to grab 3 different ones, and then I import all 3, and then I make it so that when something is destroyed, it will play that sound effect, and it will pick between one of the 3 so that they all pop with different sounds, which I think worked out pretty well. I end up redoing one of the pop sound effects that I didn't quite like, and I'm off on the debris now, making the little debris blobs that shoot out from the center when you destroy something. I ended up trying to get these to work with like a string, sort of connecting them to the center. I wanted them to sort of like shoot out similar to how like asteroids worked, but I ended up scrapping that when I couldn't figure out the line. I have the health bar now change color. Everything's popping and whatnot. I start work on the ship and decide I'm better off using a sprite. So I hop over to a sprite and I get it all looking good. I found the mirror tool finally. And I'm really liking the way that it turns out here. And I sort of work with it, adding on little bits and pieces. I did animate the fire, but you can barely tell in the end result. Some shading going on, just make it look nice, and I end up changing the way that this looked. I much prefer the end result rather than what it looked like before. I'm trying to animate the fire a little bit. It's barely noticeable in the end result, but still looked pretty good. Then bring it all in. I'm messing with the movement and trying to get it to turn via commands in the movement, so that it'll turn it in there, but then I ended up just going and changing it as a new sprite. So each direction is a new sprite, and I'm getting my idea for my virus, and I start work on making the sprite for the viruses. So I go with a little shape like this. I wasn't sure which one to go with at first, but this one sort of caught my eye, and then I tried to make it look as much like some of the pictures I have seen. End up changing that, trying to get it to look right as I start to animate it. What I did wrong here was I added the mid frame onto the wrong side, so it was going basically it was moving up too quickly and then down too slowly, so it looked really wrong, and I end up changing that after I noticed it. We're back, and I'm changing the sprite of the virus, and now all the viruses are no longer pink blobs but actual virus shape, and I work on the red blood cells next. I really like the way that these ended up turning out. Like I'm no pixel artist here, but I feel like they did a pretty good job on these red blood cells. I actually showed this to another person that makes games, and they were concerned because it looked like a red blood cell. They're like, that looks like a red blood cell. I'm like, that's good, that's what it's supposed to be. And I go with a little highlight, trying to use a cooler color for highlights, because I heard that's what it's supposed to be. And I import it and make it bigger for the hub one. The HUD one, that's correct. And I start working on the edge bits, the tiles that I use around the edges and whatnot. Just making it so that it can curve around corners. This is how you make a little tile set. You just sort of make it so that you can grab individual tiles from each of these areas. And I try to make it all slightly different, and I find out I gotta extend it just one more. And because it's just random, I don't bother to worry about how that inside bit is. I just sort of copy and pasted it around. And then I start work on making the corners so that I can go around corners. I need to make these extra 4 squares. So I get work on those and go around. Those are all done. And I start placing them into the world, and these are all based on 32 pixel squares. And they don't quite line up right, and I have to look it up why they're not quite lining up. And I figure out I need just a extra square around the outside, an extra pixel. So I fix that, and then I'm working on shading the little things that happen when you explode, and I decide to make the viruses also have them, but change them to blue. And I'm working on a vertical level here, and I find out that's really not going to work based off of my view. So all of the levels then start to revolve around the view, and so they're all either horizontal or they're much bigger. That way the view actually looks good. And I go back and I'm working on the background now. I have it tiled so that you can see all four, well, all the way around. So that's actually 9 tiles rather than just one. So you're seeing nine pieces of it pushed together. And I'm making little viruses popping out of cuts in the walls of the person. I feel this worked pretty well. I just hope people understand what it is. I'm not sure if everybody does. And I find out I cannot copy from Photoshop into Aseprite. I can only copy from Aseprite into Photoshop. So I couldn't go back and fix it. I had to remake it once I didn't like it. So I made a couple little cuts and things, and these were actually based off of a 64 by 64. And they didn't really want to line up right, so I had to add an extra line, an extra pixel around the outside of these as well. And after that, they sort of lined, well, actually they didn't really line up well at all, so I had to redo the snapping a couple of times, and that seemed to work for some reason. I still don't know why. But then I start working on the bullets, and originally I had the bullets sort of more, well, this shape as opposed to the circles that I ended up going with. The reason why I switched to the circles was I was trying to get them to change direction, and they just didn't want to change direction based off of the way that I was doing it. So I record the pew sound effects, and I make it so that they can change between them, and I set up so that space is fire. Whenever you tap space, it fires a bullet, and the thing is, I wanted to figure out if the bullets actually do go faster based off of the speed that you're going at. And yeah, I mean, it makes total sense, but I just wanted to be sure. So if you shoot a bullet from a train and somebody else is shooting a bullet on the ground, it's going to be going faster on the train than it is on the ground because relative motion. So I actually have it so that the bullets go faster based off of your ship speed. It's whatever your ship speed is plus a little bit, which I found worked pretty well, but I really couldn't get it to go in the right direction, so I changed them to circles. And here I'm actually changing it so that the color of the red blood cells changes slightly, so each one chooses a random value, and that random value decides what color it's going to be, with slight variation. So some of them are a little bit darker and some of them a little bit lighter. I did a lot of that with the code so that it would look like there's more variety. And now I'm off working on the music, which ended up being very, very bad. I really tried hard, but I just couldn't get it to sound right, which was rather unfortunate. Back on working on the viruses. Their movement is still not correct, and I'm trying different things. I even try to lock them into sections. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to make it so that each virus gets a value assigned to it, and then based off of that value it goes for the closest one inside of a box. And that ended up not working, but I tried that, and that wasted probably an hour. And then I scrap it. Oh, I scrapped part of it. I'm still working on that same thing. I'm now over on to bullets again. They're still looking bullet shaped and not circles yet. And they're not going in the direction I want them to. However, I do get them to go out of the different guns there. And there we are, we're switching it over to circles at that point. Changing it so that it looks like they're coming out of the guns on the ship, which was very important to me. I really didn't want it to just come straight out of the front. I didn't think it'd look right. So that's why I worked on that. So severely, I'm back on the music again. Music is still not sounding good. I'm really trying to sort of channel Dr. Mario and stuff. I'm listening to other things and like I just cannot seem to get it. I need to spend some time just working on music to actually be able to make anything interesting, I think. And I'm making a new level at this point. This is the game over screen, so with the game over screen, I'm just trying to add on some text. I hadn't really made a plan by this point of how the game over would look. So it's just text, and I was gonna have it be continue yes or no, and then it would switch between yes and no. It was gonna be white text and then change to yellow text. And that worked pretty well. I was able to get that all set up. It looked pretty good, but I ended up changing this. And here I am. I've decided at this point that I want it to be on a piece of paper, so I'm trying to get the shape of the paper, and I actually go ahead and look up Comic Zone's method of doing the paper, because that's sort of what I was wanting to lean towards. So I draw up a very simple desk that I don't even end up using in the final thing, but I draw it up and I write down a bunch of information, just little flavor text really, that goes onto the paper, and it looks pretty good. I even used one of my subscribers' names, because he helped me out in the drawing phase, so his name is actually on there, Ben Larson. You can see it at the top there. I based it all off of the left side so that it looks like text on a page, and I go back to working on levels. Here I'm making it so that when I press space it actually will start the game, I believe. Yep. Oh, and I'm adding the background to this level. So the very first level, the one that I made in the very beginning, ends up being level 2 right now. It then becomes level 3 later on, which I just thought was kind of interesting. Oh, and now I'm working on the cut that is sealed up when you fire. The way that seals up is actually based on how long the bullet is over top of it, rather than any other value I could have picked. Oh, and then here I've finally figured out how to use the self.value so that it will then make the viruses go towards the closest blood cell. And programming the game over screen here. And I want it to be on easy mode. If there's less than 3 blood cells, you get game over, and if you're on hard mode, it's less than 5 or something like that. Right here I'm trying to actually add in the values for the red blood cells popped and the viruses popped, and I had trouble with it, but I eventually got something to show up, and I went around looking it up, and I managed to get the value in there finally. Now what was interesting is it was actually that both values were ending up on the same line, and I didn't know this at first, so I thought that there was an extra 0, and I couldn't figure out why there was an extra 0 for the longest time. And eventually I figured out that it was the second value was on the same line, and I dropped it down there, and getting the spacing right, and now it all looks good, where the blood cells and the viruses popped are showing up correctly. It was carrying over between restarts, so I ended up changing that so it wouldn't do that anymore. I believe that's what I'm working on here. And so I thought about making it a better wood texture, and then I ended up going with more of a more of a old school sort of table, one of those like cheap, almost like plastic tables. Like, I'm not even sure exactly, but it was supposed to be a lamp on it, which is why it's lit up like that. I think it looked pretty good in the end. It looks sort of like a doctor's table. And I've now tilted the menu by 2 degrees or something like that, so every bit of text that I put on there also has to be tilted by 2 degrees. And I'm trying to get it all to look good as I place it on there. And I end up spending a lot of time on trying to get options to work. And I wanted the paper to slide down and the options to be behind it. So I worked quite a while on this. And I'm making the options button right now. I actually add a little bit of coloring to the paper. I don't know if you can even tell it's there in the final game, but I wanted to add it. I'm sure some people with higher contrast or something can see it. Oh, and I ended up deciding that I was going to use my little placeholder sprite that I was using for sound to jump between the different options when you go to the options menu, but like I said, the option menu just wouldn't end up working out well. I couldn't figure out how to move the paper down, keep it down until I wanted it to come back. I think I would have had to move it down, have it be deleted, and then recreate it and have it move back up. I think that would have been the best way to do it, based off of what I could do. Oh, and I love this. I actually ended up putting a bunch of blood cells on the start menu, just so that I could get the easy mode or hard mode to work, where it wouldn't throw up an error. That ended up being sort of like a little bit of a cheat, you know, almost like a little hack to make it work properly. I believe I did end up fixing it, so that wasn't necessary, but it's still there just in case. It's actually off screen, so you can't even see it. And I was working on another level, and then I'm working on getting it so that the cut and the viruses, they both have to equal nothing in order for you to be able to go through. There has to be 0 cuts left and 0 viruses left, and I really wanted the cuts to stay as like a sealed up little slice rather than getting rid of them completely, so I made it so that when it goes fully closed, that makes cuts left equal -1 for each one of those or whatever, so that it would end up actually working out without having to make them be deleted, which I think is pretty good. And here I'm working on more audio. I believe this was the sound effect for... yes, this is the sound effect for background and also the engine. So I ended up not really leaving in the engine one, but the background sound, I have both a heartbeat and like a sort of like a gurgling sound almost. So it's just supposed to provide a little bit of ambiance, make it sort of feel like you're actually inside of a human body, just a little bit. You know, nothing crazy. I'm working on more levels, getting it so that it will actually work out pretty well, have a variety of different levels. And here is finally a second enemy. This one is the enemy that will pop you if you touch it, so you have to shoot this one, which adds another new little element to it, where you actually have to use the bullets or dodge them. And I had them in. I start working on how it's popping, and I add in the same, they all use the same shape of debris. I guess that's what I should call it. The debris from each thing is always the same. I just have little values that change the shape slightly and change the way it looks. And here's something nobody's ever seen in the game because nobody's ever gotten far enough. I believe there's a bug that actually prevents people from getting through the level where you have to move slow. So there's actually a boss fight. There's a boss fight where you have to run away from a giant virus that's chasing you down. That's the last level in the game. So it's a shame nobody was able to see that. I'll probably make a version 2 that will make it so that you can get to that a little more easily. Not sure if there'll be more levels after that. We'll have to wait and see, but I'm working on another virus room here. This is the move slow. This ended up being the one that has a little bit of issues. Just, it's not wide enough for you to actually get through without popping too many blood cells. If I just make it a little bit thinner, it should be okay. A little bit wider path, a little bit thinner on the sides. Once I do that, it should be pretty good. I did like that level. I feel it did pretty well. And I believe at this point I am working on... Yes, I'm working on the background sound. I believe that was the... That was the heartbeat, I think. Could be wrong about that, but I believe that was the heartbeat. So here I'm working on the chasing level, the last level. I wanted it so that you had to dodge all these different little areas. I didn't want it to be too bad, like going down a path that turned out to be a dead end, but I did want it to be that you could almost get caught on some of these bits of terrain. So I go ahead and I add in the giant virus, and I'm trying to figure out how to get him to move in properly. And we're now working on voiceover with only 1 hour 35 minutes. This is when I started working on the voiceover for each level. It was sort of just an added bit that I think made it more funny. Some people really didn't like this at all, and I do agree that I was a bit heavy-handed with the effects. I sort of was trying to increase my pitch naturally, and then I was increasing my pitch in the effects, and then I was trying to change it so that it sounded more muffled, so I'm adding on all these different little filters and things and reverb, and some people thought that I just had a terrible mic. Which is actually kind of funny, but I just wanted it to sound like somebody was talking to you from outside of the body. And I think it achieved that. I think I could have done it better. I think I should have had just a little bit less on there, but all in all it went okay, and I made it so that I wouldn't even have to add something new to each of the rooms. I just have a persistent little bubble that would go and be carried from each room and would, based off of the room, turn on different sound. And the giant virus, I wanted him to not collide, and that took a little more time than I had anticipated. There's just a bit of difficulty with that for some reason. So then I work on the final room, and then I'm off to submission with only about 45 minutes left. I then start submitting, and I end up looking up Dr.Micro and see if it's already a thing, and it is, but it's pretty obscure, so I go ahead and call it Dr.Micro anyway. And everything seems to go well, and I send it through, and I'm pretty happy with how it ended up. I did have a little bit of a bug that wasn't found until later, and I had to go back and fix, but I'm still pretty happy with the game. I think it turned out pretty well for first thing I've ever really made, and just want to thank you guys for checking out this Ludum Dare post-mortem, and I hope you guys will stick around for what I do in the future, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye!